you. Can you guys hear me without the microphone okay? Well, first of all, I just want to say what a great week it's been and a great kickoff event it's been, and thank everybody involved in the committee, and Barbara and Shannon and you and Aaron Kurtz for recommending the book, and Nancy and everybody, and Jan, everybody who's made this a great week. I had a great honor of talking to a lot of the students. Can I see, have any of you, were you any of you at the talks this week? No? You were there? Which school are you from? RLS. RLS, so you're there today. And I was picking on my nephew Ben. He goes to RLS. So I'm always happy to come. Well, when they told me about this, they said, would you be willing to come back to Napa? And I live in New York City, which we like to call Hurricane Sandy land. So, you know, twist my arm to come back to Napa. That was no problem. I actually got married here in Napa. My brother has lived in the area for a long time. I have two nephews who, one goes to RLS, and I have another nephew who's a junior at St. Helena High School. So anyway, thank you so much for having me here. And can I see how many of you guys have had a chance to read the book? Is this all new? Some of you have and some of you haven't. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my background, and it's sort of a journey that I never expected to take, and finding myself here is a great bonus. I grew up in Florida, and a small island called Key Biscayne, which is just off the coast of Miami. You did not.
I did. Well, in West Palm Beach, kind of.
Close enough. All right. So this was in 1978. There's a picture of me when I'm about 10 years old. I started playing soccer, and I started when I was 8, and it wasn't really by choice. My older brother was playing. He basically made me just chase the ball that he kicked wherever it went. And it turned out that I had a skill for it. And this is an unusual thing in 1978. There weren't that many opportunities for girls to play sports, and certainly not to play soccer. And you girls now, do any of you guys play soccer now? Well, and even if you used to play soccer, the choices are somewhat endless. You know, you can play rec soccer, you can play travel soccer, you can play your school. I mean, but for me, at that time, and for most women of that age, there weren't really very many opportunities to play. So I was lucky in that I loved the sport, and this sport was big in where I had grown up. So I continued to play in high school. I played very seriously on a lot of different teams. I got a lot of big muscles. And I also worked really hard in school, and so I started getting recruited by some colleges. And I was recruited by a lot of schools, some of which were really great soccer teams, and some of which were really great universities. And my father said, well, hi.
Future reader. There you go.
My father said, you know, you're probably not going to play soccer for the rest of your life, so maybe you should pick the better school. So I decided to go to Harvard, and I played there. I played there for 4 years, and it was a great experience. And afterwards, he was right. I would still play soccer on the weekends, but I moved to Europe, and then I went to graduate school, and soccer sort of took a back seat. I started working in journalism in New York City, first at ABC News, and then at NBC News, and primarily at the Today Show. Who knows what that is? Everybody knows the Today Show. And my first job there, you know, I started carrying coffee, and I worked my way up from, you know, the lowest ranking job and to become the supervising producer of the show. And it was a great career, particularly when I was single and I didn't have any children, because I could get that phone call in the middle of the night and say, you know, there's a big story in Tennessee and you need to get on a plane and go. And I would say, I'm there. And sometimes there were really sad stories. You know, I would get that call and there was a plane crash, and, you know, I was the person that had to go to the site, and, you know, my job often was to find family members of people who had been killed and ask them if they wanted to come on television. It was a terrible thing to have to do. It was a terrible time. But it was that kind of job. I mean, it was definitely, you know, exciting, sometimes sad. I got to go to the White House. You know, we used to do everything. The Today Show has changed in some ways. It still covers everything, but when I was doing it, was more hard news driven. And, so for me, I loved it because if I got an assignment, say, for example, one time I got an assignment about, there was a movie on NBC about giant squids attacking, fictional giant squids attacking, but something like 13 million people watched it. So my boss came to me and said, can you do a story about giant squids? And I said, I don't know anything about there are no giant squids. He said, well, go ahead. And, it was that kind of opportunity. So I said, okay, well, let me find some squid and I'll bring him into the studio in a big tank full of salt water, which is not as easy as you would imagine to do. And especially in New York, where all the squid are already calamari. So I had to find all the Fulton, call the Fulton Fish Market, and they say, yeah, we got squids. How many you want? I want a live one. Oh, no, they're all dead. So I actually had to fly in some squid from Texas with 2 squid handlers. True story. And I called the aquarium. I said, well, can you bring your octopus to the Today Show studio? And they just start laughing. No. And so, it was that kind of thing. And the end of the squid story, I'll tell you, this is actually my first day of work at the Today Show. So I had all these pictures of giant squids that had never been captured, and we were trying to find it. And then we called the Smithsonian, and the world's, expert on squid with the squid tie, like the guy who's probably in the basement reading about squids for 30 years, like, I'll come. So he came, and then the squid that I had flown in from Texas, I had to get a fish tank with salt water, an enormous one, also not that easy. We did it, but I didn't know that you couldn't have a reflective fish tank because apparently squid are a little bit aggressive. And so all this squid started trying to kill themselves by bashing their heads against the side of the tank because they thought it was another squid that they needed to kill. So we were waiting for the time for the segment to air, and they were all kind of swimming wrong and dying. And this was my first day on the job. And Bryant Gumbel, this is a long time ago, Bryant Gumbel was the anchor. And I was so upset that my squid were committing suicide after flying them in from Texas. But he thought it was very funny. And they survived, sort of. And all the cameraman, there's a cameraman back then, all he did was he just got really close to the one squid that was swimming, and then he followed it around. But at home, you didn't know, the magic of television. So anyway, I really enjoyed my time at the Today Show. It was a great experience, and I got to do great stuff and sad stuff and politics and go to the White House. I got in trouble because I tried to pour my coffee out. I told Janet this story, and it was dark outside. To go to the White House, you have to get clearance very early in the morning. And then the Today Show's on, so it was dark, and I had a cold cup of coffee, and I didn't want it anymore. And I went to throw it in the bushes, and the Secret Service said, no, you can't do that, because I was in the Rose Garden, but I didn't know that I was in the Rose Garden, because it was pitch black out, and so they saved me from being attacked by the Secret Service. So it was a great adventure, but then I did have a daughter named Lily, and I had decided to sort of change my career and try writing. My father was a journalist and a novelist, and he wrote 3 books with a man named Carl Hyacin that you may have read some of his books. He's a pretty well-known writer. And my father had passed away, so I didn't know who to ask, but I did ask Carl. I said, how do I do this? How do I write a book? I don't know how to write a book. I know how to do writing. I mean, my job on the Today Show was writing the questions and writing and approving the script. So I had definitely focused on writing. And he said, just keep going. That was his 2-word advice to me. Just don't stop. Just keep writing, whatever it is, keep trying. So my first book to be published was not actually Breakaway. It was the book I wrote for adults that was about a man who walks onto a frozen lake in the Adirondacks, and in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, the ice can get to be about this thick enough so you can drive a truck across it, which they frequently do. So this was a story about a man who's lured onto the ice, and he falls through the ice, and he can't really move, because if you've ever fallen in very cold water, you go, you're kind of sucking your breath. And so he gets very, very cold, and he becomes hypothermic, and he can't really move his arms, and he can't move his legs, and he starts to slip under the water. And his his daughter and his friend see from the house above that he's going under the water, he's going to drown. and he slips under the ice, but he doesn't drown. And this book was called The Golden Hour because I did a lot of research. When I started writing, like I said, I didn't know how to write a book, but I did know how to research, and that was my primary skill when I was on the Today Show. Okay, now I know about squid. I knew everything about giant squid because I would study it. So I said, well, I don't really know how to write a book, but I'm going to research what happens when your body gets frozen. So I spent a lot of time, and this guy, he becomes hypothermic, and I learned that if you go underwater, normally you drown, but if you're extremely cold, sometimes you don't. Sometimes the air that's in your lungs stays in your lungs and is enough to keep you alive because your heart is only beating 1 time a minute, and the oxygen keeps your brain alive for a short amount of time. So the daughter and the friend work frantically in this hour to get him out from under the ice where he's suspended and sort of asleep. And in that time, he dreams and he figures out who's been trying to kill him, right? So somebody had tried to crack the ice. Somebody had kept him under the ice. And they pull him out, and he's barely alive, but there's a storm, and they can't get him to the hospital, so they leave him in the room. And he can't move because he's still sort of frozen, and he knows that they have left him alone with the person who was trying to kill him. So I thought that was pretty good. I thought that was pretty exciting. And I had my dad's agent, and she thought it was pretty good, and she sent it out, and nobody bought it. It's still on my computer. You're all welcome to read it. I hope that one day, actually, when I tell this story, especially to the middle schoolers, I get hundreds of eyes just really interested, and I think I should turn it into a kid's book, but I thought it would be too scary, but apparently not. I need a vampire to fly in, and it'll be a bestseller. But so in the period of time when I was trying to get that book sold, I received a letter from my school saying I had been inducted into the Harvard Hall of Fame for soccer. Now, soccer had been sort of my old life, and writing was my new life. But they asked me to give a speech about what soccer had meant to me, playing at Harvard had meant to me. And to be honest with you, I really hadn't thought about it like that. I just played soccer growing up because I thought it was fun. And I loved being on a team. And I really had not put it in the context of what it meant to me. But when I gave this speech, I realized how valuable an experience it had been for me about learning to be a team player, about learning to cope with pressure, and that how those lessons on the field had actually helped me in my career at the Today Show. There are not a lot of people who like to be told, you have 15 seconds to write something and it's going to be broadcast to millions of people, and it better be good, it better be right, and it better be done right now. But I didn't mind that. And I felt strongly that I had sort of learned to cope with stress and pressure because I had been on the field. I had lost, I had won games, and I had had all of these experiences. So I gave this speech, and I also was kind of tired. I had done all this research about hypothermia and what it means when you fall under the ice, and how do you revive somebody who's been under the ice, which, by the way, is very complicated. And so I was kind of tired. And so I learned the rule of write what you know. So I knew how to play soccer. I knew what it felt like to be a girl on a soccer team. I knew what it felt like to have a fight with my friends and to sort of cope with those things. So I wrote Breakaway, the first chapter, and I'll read you just a little bit for those of you who haven't read it, in no time. And I gave it to the editor, my agent, and she sold it in 3 days based upon just a couple of chapters. And so I learned an important lesson, which is write what you know. And I think that one of the reasons it sold, and I think one of the reasons that people can relate to it, is that it's an authentic voice. It's not me, but it could have been me in there. It's a part of me. And I'll read you just a little bit, and you can hear a little bit about Lily James. So Barbara told you a little bit. The story is focused on the main character, a girl named Lily James, who plays on a competitive team outside New York City in Westchester in a town called Brookville. Now, I live in a town called Bronxville. Now, I don't apparently look very far for my material. The main character's name is Lily. My daughter's name is Lily. My last name is Montalbano. My husband's last name is Jebejian. So Lily's name is Lily Jebejian. So I just really changed it to Lily James. I take liberties all the time, so beware. All of you may end up in a book, because when I see something interesting, I just take it, and in this case. So Lily is, like I was, just a gifted soccer player, and she's on a team, and she is a really strong character, which was important to me. I didn't have any books like this growing up. I don't think there are very many sports books for girls with strong characters. So I didn't want to write about the kid on the sideline who couldn't perform, although there is one of those characters in here. And those are also valuable stories. It was more important to me that she be a strong protagonist, yet flawed. So I'm going to read you just a little bit so you can get to know Lily, and then if you have any questions about Breakaway, if not, I'll continue. Chapter 1. It's not easy to find your place in the world, especially when you're a kid. Lily James knew that well. She was 12 now, and it had taken her a whole 10 years to find her place. 10 years is a decade, 1/10 of a century to be exact, and a century is no doubt a super long time. In case you're wondering, her place in the world isn't the sanctuary of her purple and red bedroom, or in Mrs. Krugman's 7th grade English class, or even in the secret nook of her excellent tree fort. It's where she feels as comfortable as her old sneakers, as safe as under her comfy blanket, and best of all, like a star. Her place was on the soccer field, any soccer field. Lily James loved everything about it. She lived to run, she ached to kick, and she adored tackling, legally, of course, and never from behind. She thrilled at the pounding of her heart as she sprinted toward the goal, the black and white ball floating in front and the wind rushing past her ears, created slowly by the movement of her own pumping arms and legs. She adored the smell of the grass and the fall colors in the trees all around, waving and falling like a million crazed fans. Soccer made her feel alive and important because, best of all, she could play. In fact, if she were allowed to play soccer all day long, that's all she would do. She couldn't. Soccer and sleeping and eating got in the way, and the winter made it tough. But other than that, the field was her place, the ball was her friend, and soccer was her game. So that's a little bit about Lily. And one of the questions I get, and I sort of answered, is it me? Am I writing about myself? And the answer, of course, is yes and no. Lily's a fictional character. She goes on in this story to have real trouble controlling her temper. So she's a good kid. She's sort of average, popular. She's just a regular kid. She's very good at soccer, but she has a hard time understanding crossing the line between being passionate and being inappropriate. And I think that that's somewhat common for everybody, but of course she's a character in a book, so she's really extreme. For example, later on in this story, for those of you who haven't read it yet, she has a best friend, and a bully in town picks on her best friend. And this best friend, her name is V. She is a great girl. She's probably the most normal and well-grounded character in the book. But she lives in another town. She goes to a different school. And, she's sort of slight. She's not really a big kid. She's quiet. She's just a good person. And G4 is the bully in town. He decides to pick on her for no good reason. He's a little bit jealous. He's just mean. He's just sort of a punk. And Lily does the right thing in defending her friend. She stands up to him and she tries to defend her friend. But then she crosses the line, and when it's not working and she can't get him to back off, she takes a soccer ball and kicks it at his head. Now, that was a bad choice that Lily made, but she tries to go throughout the book and sort of understand how to regain control of herself. Another thing that happens to her in the book, and a theme that we've been talking about a lot, is selfishness. And I read some of the reviews of Breakaway, and I have to say proudly that almost all of them were really, really positive. And one of them that I read was negative, said it was a little bit preachy. And I was actually glad to hear it, because I don't care if it's a little bit preachy. I really think that there are a lot of valuable stories that you can teach through sports and teach through writing, and it's a lot more powerful when it's not just direct. So if Lily is extreme and loses her temper, and the kids, and she gets a little talking to from her coach or her mom, there's a lesson in there, and that's fine with me if that's a criticism of the book. I think the parents are probably happy about it. So the next part I was going to say, where do I get my ideas? As I mentioned before, I take them from all parts of my life. I take them from my memory. I take them from people I meet. I definitely have taken many from my interesting family. Pop is a character in the book, is a Sicilian grandfather, and I had one of those. His name was Papa. And in the book, he always says brutta to Lily when he sees her, which in Italian means ugly. And that's just his greeting to her, brutta. And what Lily doesn't understand is that it's a sort of a superstition in a lot of cultures that if you have a beautiful child and that you don't want to draw attention to it, that maybe bad things would happen or evil spirits would make something bad. So in several cultures, it's pretty common. And in the Sicilian culture, it's called brutta. Well, I was the victim of this from my own grandfather. He used to call me ugly every time he saw me. Well, I didn't know, and I didn't care, and I didn't understand anything about Sicilian superstitions. I just knew that made me feel terrible. And somehow, when I was coming up with these characters, that story from my childhood popped into my mind. And, that's one of the ways. The other way is that I coach now a travel soccer team of Lily. She's grown up. When I wrote the book, she was only 4 and did not play soccer, and I did not encourage her to play soccer because I felt like I would be putting so much pressure on her. The poor kid, I already wrote a book with her name in it. Soccer was my thing. I mean, what else could I do to her? But it turns out that she's quite a little soccer player and she loves it, so I coach her team. And I get a lot of good fodder from that. And then I brought a video, which is the epic soccer fake of all times that I want to share with you, because this is one that I showed to a lot of the kids today, and I can give you just an example of how this video and then the next video can cause me, you can write a whole story just based on a little snippet that you see. So we'll watch this one and we'll talk about it.
Habrá balón para el conjunto ecuatoriano. El lateral lo va a tomar Alex Ibarra. En el 76. Pide Montaño. Uy, manotazo de Montaño. Otra Carrasco que la exageró además. Qué pícaro tuvo Carrasco allí. Casi.
Now watch carefully. It's not what you think.
Fíjate lo que hace Carrasco. Por favor, Carrasco. Por favor, Carrasco. Pocas veces visto en el fútbol. Pero ahí tiene loco. Esta sí que de Gonzalo. Espectacular.
Is that the craziest thing you've ever seen? So I showed this to a lot of the schools today, mostly just in case they were bored with my talk, but give me something else to do. But what we tried to do is we made a little bit of an exercise about, not what he did. What he did was ridiculous. It was the worst fake foul ever. But we tried to come up with why somebody would do that. I have no idea. But we were making up stories, and I was trying to teach the kids that, in their own writing, or even for adults, if you look at a blank piece of paper, it's torture. I can't think of anything to write. What am I going to come up with? There's so much material just around you. So, for example, can anybody come up with, why would somebody do something like that? For one of the examples we had, all right, go ahead. Why would he do that?
Maybe they did it so he wouldn't get a goal because he was so next to the goal and he just wanted to take the ball away.
Exactly. Maybe he did it so they wouldn't get a goal because he was next to the goal. I was thinking maybe those two guys grew up together and they were arch rivals their whole life. And he just couldn't stand it, and he was going to do anything that day to get a goal or to embarrass his friend. Or maybe, and what was the other one we came up with? He was scared to play. He was frightened. Something had happened, and he just had to get himself on the field, so he picked up the thing and punched him in the face. I don't know, anything. It could be anything. Anybody else have any ideas? Oh, he definitely wanted the foul kick, but the character, like you could make up any story from something like that. So it's not that I go and I got a note from somebody, thank you for teaching me to find ideas on YouTube. That's not exactly the idea. That was not the whole point of the lesson, but the idea is that I get my ideas from everywhere I go and anybody I meet, and I think that can take away some of the fear that young writers or any kind of writers have when they think, oh, I can't do that. How am I going to be a writer? What am I going to write about? I mean, there's just so much out there that's right in front of you that you can draw from if you look at it that way, right? It's not necessarily, your stories don't have to be like, Gone with the Wind sagas. They just have to be human and interesting and believable and something that you can relate to. I was going to talk a little bit about Brandi Chastain because she relates directly to both books, Breakaway and then the sequel, Lily Out of Bounds. Brandi Chastain, do you guys know who she is? Does everybody remember who she is? Yeah? Brandi Chastain is probably one of the most famous female athletes in the world. She is best known for winning the 1999 World Cup in the United States with the penalty kick. And she, I am honored to say, is the official soccer sister. She's the official spokesperson for the new series, which is a sequel. So Lily Out of Bounds is the same characters as in Breakaway. It's a continuation of the story. And Brandi's penalty kick, did anybody see that game? Has anybody ever seen this clip? Sort of? People sort of know about it, and I know when she came to the event they were excited and maybe they knew, but I'm going to tell you exactly what she did and how it relates to the story. So one of the themes in Breakaway is the story also of Lily's friend Tabitha. Now, the Tabitha character initially was just an aside when I started writing it, but like a lot of writers will tell you, if you have an interesting character, sometimes they take on their own role in the story, and sometimes they lead the story in directions that you don't necessarily plan. So the Tabitha character is, I would call, an anti-stereotype. I wrote her as a stereotype. So she's the richest girl in town, she's the most beautiful girl in town, she's the most popular girl, she seems to have just everything going for her. But she is probably the most unhappy character in the whole book. She really wants to be a part of a team. She really wants to be a better soccer player, but her father has been sort of pressuring her to be a serious ballerina. So the girl, Tabitha, that is so popular, and Lily's sort of average, medium popular, really wants help from Lily. But, it's just not cool, and she's too cool to ask for help. And the way that Lily ends up, they do become friends, and the way that Lily ends up helping her is by teaching her how to take a penalty kick, which might not seem an obvious way to teach you to believe in yourself, but it was my mechanism for using that theme. So in soccer, if you're going to, does anybody know has anybody taken a penalty kick? Or know how to take a penalty kick? A little bit? Okay. It's just you and the goalie. It only happens after a pretty dramatic foul in a game. And it's you and the goalie, and you walk up and you take the shot. And the goalie really doesn't have much of a chance. And the only chance the goalie has is to jump right or to jump left. And they kind of have to guess. And so what they do, most importantly, is they watch the kicker. So if you ever watch a professional game, the goalie is watching for any clue that kicker is going to give away. Which direction are they going to go? It's the only chance they have. If they jump the right way, they might stop it. They probably won't. If they jump the wrong way, they're definitely not going to stop it. So when you take a penalty kick, what's most important is that you just come up and you look at the ball and you take your shot, and that you know long before you're ever going to take a penalty kick where you're going to go, how you're going to hit the ball, and how you're going to score. Because if you sit there and you come up and you look, the goalie's saying, well, I'm going that way. And then if you look up and you say, oh, the goalie saw me looking that way, now I'm going to go that way, you probably kick it right down the middle. It's too nerve-wracking. It's one of those times when you have to see it in your mind's eye and you have to really believe that you're going to score. And you have to know how to do it, and you have to practice. It's not like some magical, I'm going to believe it's going to happen. But so Lily tries to teach Tabitha to take a penalty kick, and Tabitha just, I can't do it, I can't do it. And then finally she just gets her to try and do it and just close her eyes and believe that she can. And so that was my way of trying to teach kids to understand that if you go into something saying I can't do it, then you definitely cannot do it. My nephew, as a junior at St. Helena High School, told me that there's a big football game on Friday, and his team's going to lose. What do you mean your team's going to lose? How do you know your team's going to lose? He says, well, they're ranked number 1 and we're ranked number 6, so we're going to lose. I said, guess what? You are going to lose if you guys go in there saying that. There's no doubt about it. But you might not lose if you start seeing yourself winning. So the Brandy connection is, in 1999, it was a very not popular sport. I was working at the Today Show. I said, it's going to be great, the Women's World Cup. And my boss said, Andy, nobody cares about women's soccer. Nobody cares about women's sports. We're not doing any story on this team. And I said, you're wrong. This is going to be great. He said, I'm not wrong. Goodbye. So that man's name was Jeff Zucker, who became a very famous CEO. He's a good friend of mine. So as it turned out, I was right and he was wrong, and this became a really, really big deal in this country. And I know these young girls may not believe it, but it was a sport that was nowhere, and then all of a sudden the whole country just kind of got really swept up in it. The last game was played at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, to capacity 90,000 crowds. This is the largest sporting event for women, I think, in history, and one of the largest crowds for any kind of sporting event. It was also watched on television by millions and millions. So they played China, and they were tied after 90 minutes, and they were tied after overtime, so they went into penalty kicks, and it had to be decided by penalty kicks. So I'll let you watch this little bit, and then we can talk about it.
USA-China, a repeat of the '96 Olympic final. 90,000 people were in attendance, a record for a women's-only sporting event, and an estimated 40 million watched on television. Ironically, a World Cup that had treated its viewers to more than 3 goals a game served up a final with none in 120 minutes. China came closest, Christine Lilly the heroine, clearing Fan Yunji's header off the line in extra time. Penalties, for the first time in a FIFA Women's World Cup final. Scurry saved Liu Ying's spot kick, giving the US the edge. At 4-4, Brandy Chastain had a shot at glory.
I don't know if I can describe this well enough in words, but it was like, it happened very quickly, but it was in slow motion. But I could see it, like almost see the ball not rotating and just hitting the back of it. And then it was like, then the explosion of the people behind, and you see all the colors and the flashes and everything. And next thing you know, you're giving your celebration, and then the team is on top of you.
Own goal villain to World Cup winner in a matter of days. Brandy Chastain's penalty and celebration were seen all over the world. A captivated nation rejoiced, and this time the public did know all about their team's World Cup heroics. It was a defining event in the history of women's sport.
I still get chills when I watch that. I don't know if anybody remember. Does anybody remember it now? Yeah. It's hard to explain quite what a big deal that was. How many of you younger people know what Title IX is? You know what Title IX is? Okay. Kind of. So I would be called the Title IX baby. So for the generation of older than I am, like my mother's age and maybe 15 years older, they didn't really have much opportunity to play sports. And then there was a law that is now 40 years old that was passed called Title IX, which required organizations or schools getting federal funding to distribute that money evenly to boys and to girls, men and to women. And it was not intended to impact sports as much as it did. It ended up impacting sports more than anything. So if there was a college team that had a men's soccer program, they now had to have a women's soccer program. And it opened up the door for people like me and people like Brandy. So I was 3 years old when Title IX was passed. And without it, I don't think I would have gotten to go to Harvard. I don't think, I had good grades, but I know why I got in. So in this moment, it was a real culmination of all of these years of people fighting for equal opportunities for girls to get on the field, which today, luckily, you guys don't have to worry about. So I think it's great. Do you guys have any questions about anything I've said so far? About the book?
Why was the book titled Breakaway?
Why was the book titled Breakaway? That's a good question. It's a double meaning. Breakaway is a soccer term. Do you know what it means in soccer? It's also, I think, in basketball, you have breakaways. A breakaway, who knows what it is? You know what it is?
It's when you just go for it, isn't it? When you just go for it.
You're definitely going for it in a breakaway. Who else knows? Anybody else? Somebody else is here? What's a breakaway?
Usually when other people are behind you, it's just probably you and the goalie.
That's right.
Running towards
Yes, that's exactly right. So it's a very rare, it's probably the most thrilling moment in a soccer game that happens in only a couple times in your lifetime, really, where you break free of all of the defenders and all of the team, and it's just you and the ball and grass in front of you, you're running full speed and you're going towards the goal. It doesn't happen very often. But when it does, it's sort of, the wind is rushing and it's so thrilling. So it's a soccer term, but it was also a double meaning for Lily trying to break away from some of her bad habits. And in particular, it had a lot to do with Tabitha, who learns to break away from what her parents were forcing her to do what she wanted to do. So it was a double meaning. And in the next book, Lily Out of Bounds, the idea is to have each player on the team have their own story. These are slightly shorter. So it's pulling out each one and then using sort of a soccer term, the name, and then so the next one is called V Offside, which is not offsides, which I always thought there's no S, which who knew? Any other questions?
We have some questions that people wrote down before.
Oh, great.
How much time passed between first beginning to write until your first book was published?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would say I started writing in the fall of 2005, and Breakaway was published in May of 2010. So the book I told you about, The Golden Hour, I spent 2 full years writing it. I had a child in that time, so I was a little tired. I probably was not as productive as possible, as parents would understand. But that took me 2 years, and then I got the contract for Breakaway in March of 2008, so a little bit more than 2 years passed. And then interestingly, I wrote another 3/4 of a book after Breakaway, which was not a sports book. It's about tree fairies, totally different topic. And the publisher didn't want it, so I never finished. I wrote half of it, but I didn't write the whole thing again because I had already been down that road. And that's exhausting. Then I was approached by a new publisher who wanted to use the characters from Breakaway to make a series. So now I have a different publisher. And Lily, this first book, Lily Out of Bounds, I actually wrote this. I had a meeting this past February. I started writing in March, and it was published in July. So it was very different. The publishing world is changing very rapidly. And the first book, I did it in the very traditional way with the agent, went to Penguin, and the whole thing. It took 2 years, and I'm very proud of the book, and I'm very grateful for their opportunity and their expertise, but I see that the future is a little bit different. And so, I think for young adult books, it's in transition because not everybody has a device, and kids still like to hold it, and I know adults in particular have the nostalgia for actual books, but I really do think that the younger generations are so into their devices that they're not really going to miss them because they're not going to know. So digital books, you can't sign them. That's the only problem. And so you can't put them on your bookshelf, but it really was a vastly different amount of time. Any other questions?
I have another one here that
Okay.
someone asked. When searching for representation, how many responses did you get before someone decided to offer you their services?
As an agent? Well, I actually was in a very unusual situation. I don't know who asked that question, but I didn't have to go find an agent because my father had been writing. And his agent, so he died, this is actually a sad story. He had written 3 books with Carl Hiaasen, who, if you guys have ever heard of him, wrote Hoot and Flush and a lot of adult books. He was, my father was a journalist at Miami Herald. He was a foreign correspondent, and that's why we lived in Miami. He was from New York. And Carl Hiaasen at the time was a cub reporter. And so my dad was the name and Carl was the helper, and they wrote 3 books together, which were thrillers about the drug trade in Miami during the 1980s, a lot like Scarface, same genre. So they wrote 3 books, and they did pretty well. And then my father was sent to China for an assignment, and Carl started writing on his own, and Carl became hugely successful writing these sort of farcical crime books. And so Carl started doing his own writing. And then my father wrote another book in 1997 that was supposed to be his big breakout book. It was called Basilica. And he wrote it by himself, and it was going to be his book to equal the success of Carl. And I had booked him on the Today Show, which at the time, getting on the Today Show could really make or break a book and how it did. So he was booked on the Today Show, and unfortunately he died of a heart attack right before it was published. So Carl came on the show on his behalf and promoted it anyway, but it's hard to promote a book without the author. Nevertheless, to answer the agent question, their agent is a very well-known agent in New York and had known me since I was a child. So when I said I was going to try and write, I sent it to her, and she took me on, even though she doesn't really even take on clients anymore. So I had a lot of good fortune in getting to skip that whole torturous part. Anybody else?
What was your first book that you wrote?
The first book, were you here when I talked about The Man on the Ice?
Yes, I was.
That was the first one that I wrote. And then the second one was Breakaway. And then the third one was about the fairies, but nobody liked that one. And then this one is about Lily, who's the character from Breakaway. That's all I got. I am writing V right now, and I am, for the first time, writing in V's voice. And it's very difficult. I found it very challenging to change perspective. So in these 2 books, it's from the point of view of Lily. And I know that character very well. And I know how to write in Lily's voice. And it's probably a lot more me than I realized because it came very easily. So now I'm trying to write in V's voice. And it can't sound the same. If you read it, you say, well, that's not V, that's Lily. And you still have to include Lily. So Lily's always around causing trouble. So it's been very challenging to change voices. And you guys, do you understand what I'm talking about, the kids? You know what I'm talking about with changing voices? Not really. What that means is if you read a story and Harry Potter's telling the story, and then all of a sudden Hermione starts telling the story, it's from a different set of eyes. So I'm doing it from a different set of eyes. Anybody else have any other questions? Sure. Well, that is actually a very good question because I don't know. I don't, when you work with the big publishing house, that's another thing, you have no say really in what's on the cover. I think that Lily is the bigger person, and I think that that's Tabitha in the back because it doesn't look like V at all. And then the hardback cover, I don't know if anybody has a hardback here. There are 2 girls, but the main character that I would think would be Lily has brown hair. It looks actually just like me from behind, but it's not me. So they take a lot of stock photos, and I actually, getting back to your Breakaway question, I actually thought and wanted the cover to be full of action, because breakaway is not a static thing. A breakaway is, fast. I wanted it to be a girl's hair flying and that feeling of sort of freedom, and you're breaking away. That's why it's called a breakaway, But I lost that fight. However, in this one, I did not lose the fight, and this is actually a photograph taken by my brother-in-law of my old soccer team on Key Biscayne. So it is more meaningful to me because I know exactly who those people are, and they are a U12 girls soccer team. So it's a little bit more authentic. Any other questions about writing or anything? Sure?
Why did you write a soccer book?
Why did I write the soccer book? Because I was tired of writing the mystery book. I don't know. I mean, I think that I definitely was not one of those people who wrote every word down in my life. There are writers who are born writers, who have diaries, who write every single thing down, and that's just how they are. That was not me. But when I started to write, were you here when I talked about the speech I had to give at Harvard? I had to give a speech about how soccer had affected my life, and I had never thought about it. And then when I talked about it, I realized how much it had impacted my life and my career as a journalist. And I decided I had also become a mother. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could write fun stories that have good, strong girls and make them interesting and teach a little bit in between. So that's why. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Are you still coaching?
I am still coaching. I am coaching the Yonkers United Roadrunners, U9 girls travel team. And, huh?
Lily, your daughter is on that team?
Lily is on that team. Yeah, they're great.
How old is she?
She's 8. She's 8, and she's really, they're both kind of mad at me right now, actually, because they couldn't come, first of all. And William, who's my son, who's 6, says, well, what are you going to write a book about me? So he's a little miffed about that, too. And I have a couple more things I can talk about. Happy to take any more questions about writing or the Today Show or soccer.
How did you think of making a soccer book? How did you get the idea?
Of making a soccer book? I don't know. It just came to me one day. I said, I'm going to write a little girl's book. I think it was because I had a little girl, and I decided I probably wanted to write a book for her. But sometimes the ideas just pop in your brain.
How much time do you spend writing per day?
Not enough. It's very difficult to be disciplined about it. I don't do it in terms of time, but when I'm actively writing, I do a word count. So I make myself write 1,000 words before I can stop. And it doesn't sound like that many, but when you're writing fiction, it can either happen really quickly or it can take a very long time. I recently started playing tennis, and it's very bad for my writing career because I really like to go outside. And I still love playing sports. I don't play soccer anymore. I do coach soccer, but when I play tennis now, I just feel like a little kid. If I go to a clinic, I just feel like a little kid in soccer practice again. So I really enjoy that. So to tell you, I write best in the morning, which probably has a lot to do with caffeine. I almost tried to call my first book. I wrote it during nap time because I had 2 small babies at home, and it was very, very difficult because it's not easy to block out all the distractions of Facebook and email and telephones. And even if I have a babysitter at home with me, if I'm home, my kids are all over me. And I cannot write books like this in 10-minute sections. You have to we were talking a lot with the kids today, you have to create the world that you're in. You have to create it to the point where, the details are really authentic and believable. And if you step out of it, even for a little while, it's really difficult to get back in there. So my normal writing day, if I'm really into it, like when I was writing, the reason I wrote this one so quickly is because I wanted it to be done before the Olympics, where we were hoping that the women would win the gold medal, and thank you very much, they did, so that was very nice. I wake up, I get the kids to school, I cannot help it that I read all of the newspapers and I read all of the news websites and a couple gossip sites. And I have this habit from when I was in the news world. When you work in, are any journalists in here? When you're in the news world, you cannot come in and not know what's going on. Because somebody starts talking to you about a story that happened. If you don't know, then you're in trouble. So you have to read in every day before you even get there. I used to wake up and listen to the news while I was getting dressed on the radio. And then I would get to my desk and I would read the wires, which doesn't even really exist anymore. So I would read in, and I still have this obsession with the news, and I always read in. And then I get my distractions out of the way, and then I sit down and I write. And I probably can write, I cannot write for 8 hours a day. It's too exhausting. Probably 3 hours max. And then I don't know, do something else, take care of my kids.
Can you give us like a pointer on like writing? What is like?
Sure. What part? Well, I can tell you what I was talking about with the schools today, that writing can be very frightening, and if you don't feel comfortable, first of all, you have to just keep going, keep practicing. But if you break it down into some basic components, it can seem a little bit easier. If you look at it like a puzzle, you have three or four different pieces. I like to think of it in 3 pieces. You have your characters, you have your plot, and you have your setting. Now, your characters, I think sometimes people think if I'm going to make a character, I have to describe, what they look like, their eyes and their hair and their face and their shoes. And yes, if it's your main character, you want to sort of draw a picture of what they are. But mostly what I've tried to do, and I think in a lot of other books, is you just have to have characters that make sense and are memorable. So, for example, Harry Potter. Harry Potter has a scar and broken glasses and dark hair. She doesn't really go into, great description of what he looks like, but she just has a character that you're going to remember this. In my book, you have this grandfather, Pop-Pop, and everybody I asked today, what do you know about Papa? Oh, he calls her Bruta and he likes to eat food all day. So those are memorable characters, right? They're just little quirky things that make that person unique. And today at school, we were doing an exercise and we were trying to create a character. And we were creating a character that, for example, his name in one school was Bob Dylan. The kids named him Bob Dylan. And he was really big, he had huge muscles, and he wore baggy pants where you could see his boxers, and he broke all the rules, and he walked around, he was green and gruff and scary, except that, one day they saw his boxers and they were like little puppy dogs and little things that I love mommy on his boxers. And so, if I ask you a year from now, what was the guy we made up? You're going to say, oh, he's the guy who had the droopy pants, but he had the puppies on his boxers. Because they have little things that you're going to remember about those characters. Kathleen Rowling, J.K. Rowling did it really well in Harry Potter. Hermione and what's the guy, Ron, he's got red hair. That's all we really know about him, right? We know more because we see pictures in the movies, but in the book, she doesn't describe him in great detail, but he's got this crazy red hair. So you remember that. All of his brothers and sisters have this crazy red hair. So when you're writing characters, it's not so much that you have to write every little thing. You just have to make it something that when they're reading it, they can visualize it in their mind and remember later. The other thing we talked about a lot today in the schools was using techniques to help you with your plot. For me, and I know the stories generally have an arc. You have your beginning, your middle, and your end. And in the beginning, generally what happens is you set up your story of this is what is happening in normal life. This is what a normal day is like, right? This is a normal day for Lily. Or this is a normal day for Harry Potter, where he lives under the stairs. And then something dramatic happens, the inciting incident, right? This is a very common way to write a story. So if you have a plot, so you can make up anything. Like if you wanted to write a story, you could say somebody goes to camp and the story begins at the beginning of camp when everything is fine, and then something happens, and then all the action happens in the middle, and then the resolution happens at the end of the week. So you can use little techniques to make it easier to start. And if you look at almost all the stories or movies you see on television, they have these techniques where it's the day or a week or a year in a life that the story is contained. And that can be really helpful when you're trying to write something and you're not sure how to get your plot going. And then you can end up filling in the blanks. And when you have those well-drawn characters, like I said a lot of times, they'll just help you move the story along, because if you know who they are, you know what they're going to do. You know, in Lily's case, in Breakaway, we know that she has a really bad temper. She makes really bad decisions. And so you know if you put Lily in a certain situation, she's not going to probably do the right thing at that point in the book. Later on, when she gets a little bit more mature, she's probably going to do the right thing. And the last thing we talked about is the setting. And I think that the example I gave today with the kids, or we could even do it right now, is you could say, I went to the library and heard a lady talk about a book. And everybody was asleep reading your story in about 30 seconds. But so the setting is not necessarily where it is, it's the way that you can make somebody feel like they are there. So if somebody were to talk about, here we are in this room, you know, you would have better luck if you said, well, there were these, you know, crazy lights hanging from the ceiling that looked a little bit like an alien, and the chairs were gray and blue, and the doors kept opening, and outside there was a really loud hum. You know, and there was a cute little girl. But you can write the little details that make somebody who wasn't here believe that they were, or at least feel like they were. And so those are some tricks that I was trying to share with the kids. And the other thing that Carl Hyacin taught me, who's written a lot of books, because I called him up and I asked him exactly the same thing. How do I do this? And he just said, just keep going. And at the time, I was really disappointed. I wanted, you know, like a 10-point checklist that I could follow. And all he said was keep going. And then I have learned that he's right. You know, after I wrote Breakaway and then I wrote the book about the fairies and my publisher didn't want it, I felt really defeated. I felt really bummed out. And I stopped writing for a little while. I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. What's the point? And then somebody came to me and said, well, you know, keep going. So I did. So that's the other advice. Sure. Yeah.
Did you have anyone review parts of the book that you're writing other than agent, publisher, etc., like your kids, your husband, good friend?
My sister, my stepmother, yes. Yes, I definitely, I do it less now because I think I have more confidence in what I'm doing, but I definitely, I had no problem sharing my writing, and I really welcomed comments, because if somebody who's reading it says, well, I don't really get this part, then odds are they're not the only one who's not going to get it. You know, and sometimes you think it's clear in your mind, it's not necessarily clear on the page. Yeah, I share my work. I don't. You got to get over that, because if you're going to write it and publish it, a lot of people are going to read it. So you can't be worried about that. Anybody else? Sure.
When you first started writing, do you automatically know where you're going, like how it's going to end, or do you find it as you go along?
I've done it both ways. In Breakaway, I really didn't know where the story was going, and in all honesty, I had a lot more action in there. And the editor that I was working with at Philomel wanted it more focused on the friendship, so I had to take out a lot of the action that I didn't necessarily agree with, but I'm proud of the product, but it was a little bit of, I didn't know where I was going, because the action he took out changed the storyline. With Lily Out of Bounds, I had thought a lot about what I wanted to write about. In this story, Tabitha is not in this story, but there's a new girl named Colby who is a cheater. And she doesn't care about the rules, she just wants to win. And she exerts a lot of peer pressure on Lily to do things that she shouldn't. And I knew when I had sort of plotted this book out pretty precisely, and it came very easily to me. So when I wrote it, it was a lot easier. And whenever I do plot it out, I don't plot it out precisely. When you're writing stories, you know, you need to have a lot of dialogue, but you can't just write dialogue. Like, it's pretty unusual for some person to stand up here and talk to you for a really long time. Usually when people are talking, they're doing something else. So if you're going to have a conversation, you know, somebody's usually chopping vegetables, or there's something else happening. We don't often sit there and just look at each other and talk. Somebody's eating, or somebody's drinking, or somebody's walking. And so those little details I always have to just kind of come up with. So I can say in this chapter, I know that Lily's going to go to a tournament. There's going to be a new player on the team. She's going to be really good, but she's going to have a lot of gamesmanship, and she's going to cheat, and Lily's not going to know what to think of it. So I can write, I know that's what I want to happen in that chapter or that scene, but then the details, I just have to figure it out as I go. And just, you never know what's going to come in my mind or not come in my mind.
You mentioned doing a lot of research for your other writing, especially when you're in the news industry. Did you have to do additional research? Did you spend time with middle school girls? What kind of things did you do?
To write these books?
Yeah.
Well, I definitely got a lot of people asking me, how can I write like a young girl? And I said, well, I was one, so there's that. I didn't have to do that much research, but I will show you guys the last video that I watch a lot of soccer because I get ideas. I mean, I have my own experiences. It didn't necessarily take a lot of research, but this is a game that I'll tell you about. So in the last World Cup, in the Women's World Cup in 2011, the United States was playing in the semifinals against Brazil. And when I watched this game, I almost threw up. I was so upset. It was so terrible what happened. We were playing, and they were tied after 90 minutes. So the soccer game was 90 minutes. And then there was overtime, and they were tied in overtime. And then after overtime, the referee has what's called discretionary control over injury time. So if people have been hurt during the game, she can add, or he can add on a couple of minutes to the end of the game. Brazil scored at the beginning of injury time. So now the United States was losing 2-1. And if the referee had, the whistle in her mouth, she could blow the whistle at any time. And there was it. There was no more time to be added. That was it. They were out of the World Cup. It was going to be over. And then this happened.
Job here, and now another player. This time it's Erica has gone down needing treatment as well, and I think Brazil are banking on the fact that all this time won't be added on.
And here's the play before.
That's her right there. So meanwhile, the clock is ticking and ticking and ticking.
And
this whole thing takes like 4 minutes.
With the penalty kick, and up she goes.
And she's got off and is suddenly fit again. So that was pure gamesmanship by Brazil. They should be adding on a big chunk of time. The crowd here are incensed by Brazil. That's Erica getting off
she runs
and
right
coming
back
back here, I think. Really unimpressed by Brazil. This is not a Samba Queen team. This is all
she runs right straight back on the field. She lies on the ground moaning for 3 minutes. She gets carried off on a stretcher. And then now her team has to play short, right? So they don't have enough players. So she jumps off, and then she runs back on the field. I was watching this at home. It was so upsetting to me because they were going to lose, and it was cheating. And it was terrible. So do you know what happened? Does anybody know what happened? So the referee, who has the whistle in her mouth, has this discretionary time. They give that girl a yellow card, which is a warning. 2 yellow cards, a red card, you get kicked out of the game. But really, the game was over. The United States had lost. And in the very last second, there was one more play, and they came down, and the USA scored. And then they blew the whistle, and the game was over, and they went into penalty kicks. And the United States won that game. And a lot of people said it was soccer justice, that the referee let it go and that they got the goal. And so that was some research that I did. So that scene is actually sort of replayed in Soccer Sisters because this girl comes on to the team and they're winning and she pretends that she sprains her ankle. And Lily's like, what is she, that's not what she was taught to do. And they talk about it later and she says, did you really hurt yourself? She said, no, but that's what the pros do, so that's what I do. And it was another lesson for, kids don't necessarily do what you see the professional athletes do. And as for the voice of the 13-year-old, no, I hang out more with 8-year-olds, but I do listen. And I did talk with my nephew Ben when I was writing it. Now he is 10, but when I was unsure of how something would read, I would send it over to the people who are age appropriate, and they would say yes or no. And the one thing I didn't put in too much in either of these books, and I'm sort of hesitant to do it, is texting. I know that so many kids are communicating on their phones, and that's great, but I don't really know how. I don't even know what they all mean, like all the codes and things, so I don't put that in. That's a whole other level of research I haven't started yet. Maybe you guys can help me. Yes, no? Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's been a real honor to be here in Napa. Thank you.